bottom line to everything here, when we're talking about the Kings this offseason, is what you brought up at the end of the last segment. They are no longer this team like they were after 2022 and 2023. They were this team on the rise. They were the number 3 seed. They won 48 games. They had this young core. They looked like they were headed to the moon. And then this past season happened, and they were basically the same team. They just didn't make the playoffs. And now, instead of, because going into last season, we were looking at the Mavs like, dude, Mavs miss the playoffs, not buying it. Not buying the Clippers, not buying the Timberwolves. But now all of a sudden, you've seen Oklahoma City prove it and be the number 1 seed. Denver is going to be around. Minnesota has proven like, yeah, hey, they're a force in the West now. Dallas has proven that, yep, they are a force in the West now as Kyrie and Luka have figured out how to play together and they've gotten the right pieces around them. All of a sudden, the Kings are looking up at a minimum of 4 teams.
Yeah.
And then there's New Orleans, who went 6-0 against Sacramento last year, who's also going to be in the mix. Phoenix was a disaster in the playoffs, but Phoenix is going to win some regular season games.
Yeah.
Like this is and that's where, when we talk about the draft and you're talking about a draft pick, there's a aspect of it that where the ceiling matters, where like, man, you can't just get a player with a super, because then you're not ultimately improving your team. You're just getting another like back end of the rotation guy.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like they have a long way to go. They have to get a lot better. They're not like a draft pick away who's going to be the 9th or 10th guy in the rotation. And then, oh yeah, just go get a different backup big, and now everything's fine. Like they have, I don't want to say leaps and bounds, because a team like Utah has leaps and bounds to make to get into contention, but they have at least a small leap to get in contention. I think that's where everything has to, whether you like Kyle Kuzma or whether you want Harrison Barnes around, or whether you like Brandon Ingram or hate Brandon Ingram or Zach LaVine or whatever player we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is the point in the Kings rebuild or their ascension or wherever they're at, where you have to go compete now. You have to take some kind of swing to compete now. De'Aaron Fox is not 22. Domantas Sabonis is not 22. And none of the teams ahead of you are like significantly older.
Some of them are much younger.
Well, that as well.
OKC is much younger.
Yeah.
That's a problem. You have to figure out a way to, it's like keeping up with the Joneses, but like you got to figure it out. You got to figure out a way to jump back into conversation.
That's it.
Right? And so I definitely think that the Kings, like they're not that far away.
No.
I don't, but I also feel like they're a starter and another top 8, top 9 rotational piece away.
So that's interesting. So you say they're not that far away.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to agree, but I also don't think that means it's easy. Like where they need to get, they're not way off of it. It's not like you said, they are a couple pieces away, but it's not super easy to just go find an upgrade at the 4.
No.
Or an upgrade over a Kevin Huerter or Harrison Barnes or whatever it is. And particularly if you wind up losing Malik Monk, now all of a sudden you have to try and replace that piece of this as well.
Oh yeah.
So it's you're right. They are a couple pieces away from being really, really freaking good. But it's the path to get to those couple of pieces might be half a mile long, but there might be like a moat and maybe like a bear trap or two, and maybe an actual bear.
Yeah.
Like it is a tough road to add those pieces that they need, even if they're not considered far off.
No, I totally agree with that. And I also think that like if you were to lose Malik Monk, where that puts you, now you're looking at 3 rotational pieces that you would need to figure out. And that's nearly impossible for them to handle in this one-off season.
Yeah.
Like you might be able to find a low-level guy to replace one of those guys. You might still be able to swing for the fence and grab one guy. You might be able to add something here and there, use your mid-level and stuff like that. But like the potential to lose Monk would be catastrophic for this team. And like, look, it's still an option. It's still a possibility. And it could totally reroute how you have to think of your entire summer. And so if I'm the Kings, I'm like, you have to be aggressive. And I also think that like being aggressive and going out and trying to pull off one of these trades, if you can whisper to Malik Monk on, June 29th, a day before free agency officially opens, hey, we're bringing in X, Y, and Z. We already have like some sort of momentum to do that. That will change what his thoughts are. You can easily like secure what you're doing with Monk. And I also think that like you already took one step. The Mike Brown situation is now settled. Now it's like you got like 3 weeks here of what's going to be wild and chaotic, and it means everything. I mean, it does. Like this franchise they're at a point where you plateaued. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
They've hit a ceiling.
Yeah, and now you have one of your prime pieces that may not be back, and you have to find a way to either, to get him back in the fold, but also to improve the roster beyond that. Because that's like everyone can celebrate the day that if they're able to get Malik Monk back, but the next day, like you got so much work to do. So I think all of these things, they fit into one big giant package of like, who are you? What are you moving forward? Because if this doesn't work out this year, what are you looking at next year? Like what kind of step back do you take next year? And how do you move forward so you can move backwards so you can move forward? And we're starting to talk about like resetting everything and all that. That's what you're hoping to avoid here. You're hoping to like jump back into the conversation, not hang around the back end of the conversation, like be the wallflower who's watching everybody dancing, which is what they are this year. You got to figure out a way to jump back into that conversation. And not only that, but I think that it's not just length and athleticism. It's not just like a power forward or a small forward that they need. They need more than that. They need attitude. They need someone else who can bring something different to the table. It's why when people say, oh, why would the Kings possibly look at Jonas Valanciunas? And that's because Jonas is a mean dude, and that you will not just go in and do something stupid against the Kings if Jonas is standing in the middle of the key.
Correct.
And if you
need an enforcer,
if you want to knock somebody down, if you want to do something dirty,
stomp on someone's chest, just for example.
Just for an example. If you don't think that Jonas Valanciunas is going to check into the game with a little scoreboard in his head and go take care of business, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think that like the Kings need that as much as they need a backup center.
Yeah.
They need a Jonas Valanciunas type like player. That's why I bring up a Bobby Portis. Like, man, Bobby Portis stares into your soul. Like, there's not a player in the league that I think like puts fear in somebody like Bobby Portis.
He literally broke a teammate's jaw.
Yeah, he did.
That's a thing that happened.
It is.
Yeah, man. They need that. They need teeth, man.
Yeah,
they just need. I brought it up last year a lot. I was like, man, they need dogs, and I know that's overplayed, and I know it's like, what the hell does that mean? But it's that. It's like somebody who's going to get after it. I think that's partly just on a, bringing it night in and night out, not laying down against inferior opponents, not laying down when the Suns make a huge run to come back at the end of a game, digging in big spots. But also what you're talking about, like there just needs to be an overall shift toward like some kind of grit.
Yeah.
That I think they're badly missing. Oh, I was going to get to our caller. We had Don on the line and he is now gone. So if you want to call back, 916-909-1320, 916-909-1320, we will try and get to you as quickly as we can. Yeah, man. I was thinking about this with the Giants. The San Francisco Giants, that is. And I think one of the worst things that happened to the Giants was was it 2021 that they won 107 games? I think it was the 2021 season where they win 107 and they make the playoffs. And they lose in a brilliant 5-game series against the Dodgers. It was so much fun. But it offered this like proof of concept that the Moneyball strategy that Farhan Zaidi employed worked. And so it allows their ownership to, I don't want to say be cheap because they have the 10th highest payroll in baseball, but it allows their ownership to not do things like overpay for Aaron Judge. And whether, again, maybe Aaron Judge was never going to leave New York. The Giants could have offered him $3 billion, and he would have been like, nope, I'm going to be the Yankee captain and go to the Hall of Fame in New York, and that's what I'm going to be. Maybe that was always going to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
But that they continue finishing second to all these free agents, and they're putting in competitive offers, but it's like, bro, it's very clear that you got to go above that. But they won't now because they have this 107 wins in their back pocket, and they go, look, it works. We just got to find the right pieces. And when you're trying to find the right pieces, you're going to get a really, really uninspiring team year in and year out that maybe they win 86 games and maybe they grab a third wild card spot, but it's nothing that fans are excited about.
Yeah.
I think with the Kings, the opposite is true. 48 wins was great, but I think it's almost better for them as we talk about this urgency that they took a little slide last year just in terms of results.
Yeah.
Because now it does uptick that urgency where it's like, yo, got to do something to compete here.
Yes.
Because if they make the playoffs this year, and let's say they win a round and they go to the second round and they get wiped in the second round, then you're looking at the same roster and going, oh, okay, it's there. It's like, man, it's not though. Like it's just it's not. They have to make some kind of significant change, and I don't know if that would have been catalyzed had they, had the same year but gone to the playoffs. Had they won their play-in game and made the playoffs. So I was watching the Giants last night be just kind of a bummer to watch.
Yeah.
Just really bad vibes. And I keep going back to the 107 wins. I was like, man, that's the worst thing that could have happened.
No, I get what you're saying completely. And I think that jumping up to the 3rd seed for the Kings last year, it like reset expectations really, really high.
That's a good point.
And
yeah.
I think that, again, we kept saying like 48 wins doesn't usually equal the 3rd seed.
No doubt.
And people kept fighting like, oh, but this is like, it's not usually the way it works. That's why 46 is a 9 seed. Like you won 2 less games and you're the 9 seed.
48 this year wouldn't have made the playoffs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of the way it is. But at the same time, I hear a lot of people, oh, the Kings need to spend more. They need to do this. They need to do that. Like, I looked at their roster this year and I didn't see a pathway for them to start someone different and come up with a different result. Right. So we can talk about what Mike Brown as a coach and like what people love and what people don't like, about what he does. But at the same time, what was a clear-cut answer that would have improved this roster? And it doesn't always work that way because when Kevin Huerter goes down and Keon Ellis steps in, I think the Kings were different and like you could see an outline of something different. But also, I don't know what the overall record. I think he started like 6-0 as a starter or 7-0 as a starter. I don't know what his overall record ended up.
Sure.
But when you're looking at that, you're like, okay, that's something different. But there was no like hidden move that the Kings could have done that would have increased their win total by 5 or 6. Like injuries, sure. Hitting free throws, sure. But there wasn't like they didn't have another option outside of their starting 5, really.
Yeah, and for me, it's revisionist history to go back and say, oh, they shouldn't have. There were people who argued that they needed to change the roster up last year, but I was of the mind that like, yeah, if you're going to run it back, unless there is a surefire, definite, gonna get better move, I think you had to run it back. Like you have to see what Keegan Murray is going to become. You got to Kevin Huerter was awesome again. You bring back Harrison Barnes, and you just kind of had to see it. And then, like you said at the deadline this year, with the way their picks were tied up because of the Kevin Huerter deal, it wasn't like we've tried to make the PJ Washington trade work for the Kings, and it's like 2 rotation players and a 1st-round pick.
No,
they didn't have that option.
They did not have the ability to make that trade. They didn't even have the ability to make the Gaffer trade. They didn't. So, like, I understand that. I also look at last offseason, and you're left with the question of, like, what happened and why you weren't able to make the improvements. Like, last offseason, the Kings didn't do nothing. They signed Domantas Sabonis to a massive extension, like and they renegotiated his salary up like $9 million and then signed him to an extension. Like that's something that is meaningful and that we're not dealing with this offseason, because if not, that's what we would be dealing with today is whether Domantas Sabonis and Malik Monk would walk away right now and what that could look like for the Kings. Not the situation you want to be in.
No, not even a little bit.
Yeah, but it was once they got done with that and they still had upwards of $25 to $30 million to spend, And it was that they weren't able to go out and get a big fish. And the problem is that is the last free agency period that they're going to have. I don't see another free agency period in the next 5 years that they're going to have, because Sabonis' salary goes up, Fox's salary goes up. You're going to have to pay Keegan Murray. Like, all of these things are happening, right? So even when Herter and Barnes, if you were to hold on to them and they fall off the books, even then you're not going to have this huge amount of salary cap space. So you had this one time, right? And I think what they did is they used Harrison Barnes as a salary cap hold spot. They know that they can still go get value for him, but the fact is, you still need that $18 million salary to trade.
Right.
And so for me, they're kind of in this weird position where, again, we keep tying up their draft picks forever. We're acting like they're just going to be able to trade 4 first round picks. Well, then you don't have a way to get better in those summers. You don't have a first round pick in those summers. You could already be over the luxury tax or over the first apron or pushing the second apron. So these are all things that you have to consider when you're building out a team. And it's not just simple as like swapping pieces out and thinking it's going to work. You also have chemistry to worry about, all of these things. So I don't think it's as cut and dry as like, hey, we know where we are and we know where we have to get to. Like, what is the pathway, and how difficult is that pathway, and how much do we tie up our future, everything, in order to make this move? And it's tough, and it's why I think at certain times we're really hard on Monty McNair for being inactive. And I would continue to say, when the Kings got to December and January, you knew your team wasn't good enough.
No doubt.
You thought that there might be some switch that could be hit, but it wasn't hitting. That like no one was flipping the switch.
Yeah.
So you got to that point, and you should have done everything in your power to try to make a move then to keep yourself back in that top 4 conversation. You didn't, and now you're sort of at this point where, how do you do it right now, and how much work have you created for yourself? But that we're acting like Monty McNair didn't try, and he did, and there just nothing materialized that made sense for him in January and February. And sometimes that's the way it works as well. And you just kind of have to bite the bullet and hope for better things next year and next summer.
They were deeply involved in the Pascal Siakam stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And if they had traded Malik Monk and other stuff to get Pascal Siakam, that would have gotten panned widely.
Yeah.
And then we'd be sitting here, unless the Kings made some kind of run to the finals, which I don't think they would have. We'd be sitting here going, man, is Pascal Siakam going to resign? Like that, and then what?
Yeah.
So, no, I think in general am on board with that line of thinking, but I care less about what has happened to this point, because are there things they could have done, on the margins a little bit differently? Sure, but in general, it was always going to land at this spot where you have to go. Like, it's now.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought Damian put it perfectly. The Mike Brown contract is done. Okay, they have their coach locked in. But now eyes turn to the front office. And to me, that's their jobs. And that's the goal of the front office, is to make the team better every single year.
Yeah.
And that's why at this point, like, everything has to be on the table. You cannot just sit on your hands. And that's not to say, they should go make a super lopsided deal where they're getting hosed in a trade just to say they did something. No, but it's exploring every single avenue, which I'm sure they are, and taking every single street, turning over every rock, leaf, pick your metaphor, and ensuring that they're doing something that's going to make this team better this offseason. If you can't, well, then the conversation changes a lot.
Yeah.
But it's now to me. And I think everything has to be on the table. Every player has to be on the table. Every asset has to be on the table. Every player within reason. There's just, if it's Kyle Kuzma and Brandon Ingram, or one or the other, or Jonas Valanciunas and one of those two guys, the roster just has to, A, be different, but B, be better. Yeah. And that's the front office's gig. Like, that's their whole thing. So I think to me, eyeballs go to them now.
Yeah, and I think that being able to honestly assess who and what your team is I mean, that's so crucial at this point.
1,000%.
Like, and I know that like coming up through the Houston system, like one of the real basic tenets is never overpay your own players, right?
Mhm.
Never
Mhm.
overpay. And it's something that the Kings have done so many times here, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't know how many times, how many different people I could point to where the Kings overpaid, whether it's, go back to Francisco Garcia, or you can, like, there's all of these points in history where they overpay their own free agent or whatever because they have so much value.
Mhm.
And I know somebody said in the chat, hey, like Monty always talks about the flexibility, but he never uses that flexibility. And this is one of those moments where you have to use your flexibility. The fact that the Kings have, again, two $6 million players in Chris Duarte and Davion Mitchell that are on expiring contracts that can be traded for, you can bring back twice as much as goes out. So each of those players could be a $6 million player can be traded for a $12 million player. You can aggregate those two. Those two together can be $12 million player. You can trade for up to a $24 million player. In theory, they could trade Chris Duarte and Davion Mitchell and the 13th pick for Kyle Kuzma without touching the other stuff that they have. Now you're taking back $12 million. You're going to end up paying the luxury tax, or you're going to have to create some other space another way. But that's where, again, Trey Lyles, 1 year, $8 million. Sasha Vezenkov, 1 year, $6.5 million with a team option for year number 2. These are all, you're in a moment where you do have flexibility, and this is a moment that you might have to use that flexibility. And even the contracts of Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter, both of them are 2-year deals, and everyone can look at those and go, okay, those are reasonable rotational players no matter what in the NBA. And what do I have to give up in order, like, would I take those back in the trade to send out something bigger? They might. And so I think it's a fun exercise for us to sit here and talk about it all the time. But it's also such a complicated puzzle that Monty is dealing with. And how do you put it all together? This is not like if you've seen the thing on Facebook where it literally shows you how to fix a Rubik's Cube. There's like literally there's like 4 motions that if you just keep doing it, the Rubik's Cube will be fixed.
Hilarious.
Right? So when you see people go super fast, it's because there's like literally specific things. There is no
that's funny
4 moves that to fix the Kings and to make them the NBA champions. And if there was,
there is.
Well, maybe. But if there was, like, every team in the league would be doing the same thing. They would all understand how to do it, and they would fix their team and make their team an NBA championship as well, contender or whatever. But that's just not the way it works. And so I think it's interesting. And I think the Kings are in a really, really interesting spot because they do have the assets. They do have the value of expiring contracts in a world where all of a sudden we have a second apron. And teams are looking at that going, I don't want my 2032 first round pick frozen. Like, so there are going to be teams out there that are giving away things for less salary.
Like, good teams.
Yeah,
like
good
contending teams. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Kings need to aggressively pursue players or teams that are in a situation like that. But they also, you got to start throwing draft capital. You got to start doing whatever it is you can to get better. And that's because you're not good enough.
And honestly, 1,000%, I am right there with you. And that is why I see this online a lot. And this is not just the Kings. This is not exclusive to Kings fans. This is every fan base in every sport. When you start talking trades and picks, it's like, well, I wouldn't give up multiple first-round picks for that guy. It's like, bro, is that guy going to make your team better right now?
Yeah.
Then punt the picks.
And could that pick be the 25th pick because you got good?
That's
yes. And then what are we talking about?
Yes.
That pick's not even worth the Marco Bellinelli
of the
world. That level of player. Yeah, it's tough.